Singapore makes a lot of money. In fact, it's actually one of the only few countries that continuously reports fiscal surpluses. They do this through a combination of prudent fiscal policies, a robust economy, and strategic investments. Okay, I'm sure you're lost. Most people don't really know what a fiscal surplus is, yet it is the very concept that makes Singapore great. Fiscal surpluses derive from the difference between a government's revenues and its spending. Every year, the government has to spend money. It spends money on public services, infrastructure projects, social welfare programs, and various other initiatives aimed at improving the lives of its citizens and maintaining the functioning of the state. But to spend money, they also have to collect money. They collect money through citizens. In Singapore, they do this through various means, including taxes, fees, and fines. The government of Singapore has a well-structured taxation system, which includes income tax, goods and services tax, GST, and property tax, among others. These taxes are essential in generating revenue for the government to fund its various projects and services. Now, it is not guaranteed that any country will always collect more revenue than it spends. That is why one of the world's biggest superpowers, also known as the United States, has been reporting what we call a fiscal deficit or budget deficit. It is when the government spends more than it earns. Now, there are reasons why a government would spend more than they earn. It could be due to economic, social, or even political factors. For example, during periods of economic downturn or recession, the US government may increase spending to stimulate growth and reduce unemployment. This is what we saw during COVID-19. But beyond the pandemic, we continue to see it today. Budget deficits are most commonly the norm nowadays. What government, after all, does not want to impress its citizens. They want to continue building their economy. There's just one problem with budget deficits. They lead to debt. How else would they cover their deficit? Singapore, however, is rather different on these concepts. While it is known that the government carries a huge amount of debt, it is a different form of debt, which we will discuss later. For now, let's discuss how Singapore's government manages to consistently report budget surpluses. Okay, let's take a look at the data. According to the official public data of the Ministry of Finance, the budget for 2024 is going to record a surplus of about 778 million Singaporean dollars. However, that's actually pretty small. In fact, over the past few years, Singapore has been reporting budget deficits. Things have been quite rocky since the global financial crisis of 2008. Yes, there have been other issues globally, starting there, then passing Trump's trade war with China, which slowed global growth, then the COVID-19 pandemic that we saw today, some of which have impacted Singapore, while others not so much. The most, however, was during the COVID-19 pandemic. The Ministry of Finance recorded a massive $74.3 billion deficit for 2020. This was reported to be the largest since the country's independence. Now, don't get me wrong here. It's not because the Singaporean government has failed its people, but rather it's because they needed to keep the economy functioning. Had they not spent a lot of money, Singapore would most likely be a total mess. But these were unique times. Historically, it is known that Singapore continues to report budget surpluses. A few samples that we can check are from 2016 to 2019. Singapore had actually just collected $73 billion in revenue in 2018, while spending $77 billion. Yet the overall budget was actually a surplus of $3 billion. This is because it receives money from what it calls the net investment returns contribution. This is quite a unique aspect of Singapore's fiscal policy. The net investment returns contribution refers to the inflow of funds derived from the country's investment portfolios. Singapore's government, through entities like the Government of Singapore Investment Corporation, or GIC, and Temasek Holdings, invests in a range of global assets. The NIRC includes up to 50% of the expected long-term real returns from these investments. Now, not many countries do this. Who, after all, would use their investment income to fund their country's economy? Why don't they just use their citizens' money for that matter? What's even more surprising is that these investments do not stem largely from local borders. They are investments made in China, the United States, across Europe, and many other countries. It's as if the ones who are paying Singapore's budget are not its citizens, but citizens of other countries. This is why Singapore's money-making scheme is so incredible. This gives its citizens more money into their pockets as they need to pay less for their taxes. Had Singapore increased its tax rate competitively to, say, the US or other EU nations, it would increase Singapore's budget. However, it would also deplete a huge amount of money into the pockets of Singaporeans. Now, it would also be great to understand how taxes work in Singapore. The first is their GST taxes, which holds about $3.5 billion every year in revenue. The GST rate has been increasing in recent years. In 2023, it went up 8%. Then in 2024, it went up 9%. The problem with GST is that it is a recessive tax, meaning it disproportionately affects those with lower incomes. This is because GST, being a consumption tax, takes up a larger percentage of the income of lower-income households compared to higher-income households. Now, to mitigate this, the Singapore government had implemented various relief measures. These include GST vouchers, which provide lower-income households with cash rebates to offset the GST they pay. Another income source is the personal income tax. This is where Singapore competitively outshines most developed countries. Singapore has a tax scheme ranging from 0% to as high as 24%. Now, some people would probably think that that's outrageously high, yet compare that to, say, EU countries, which have tax rates to as high as 57%. They have high tax rates because their government wants to develop their economy well, to provide for their citizens. Singapore, however, does not need to. As we mentioned earlier, it's all because of Singapore's sovereign wealth funds. And furthermore, it's actually only recently that Singapore has increased their income tax rates. Back in 2014 to 2016, their highest income tax rate was just 20%. And finally, they also have wealth taxes to tax the richest people. And they do this through property taxes. Pretty smart move. Okay, now that we have an understanding of their tax system and their revenue schemes, it is interesting to actually understand what will happen if Singapore continues to increase their taxes. Since Singapore has been increasing its income tax rate every few years, maybe we can one day see them increase it to as high as the European nations. Although it's mere speculation, when that day comes, Singapore would actually be in a far better position. You see, at an income tax rate of 24%, Singapore is already well functioning. The government provides excellent public services, maintains a robust infrastructure, and effectively manages the city-state's resources. An increase in tax rates, if managed judiciously, could enable the Singaporean government to further enhance these services, potentially elevating the quality of life for its citizens. Now, take this question seriously. What would happen to Singapore's infrastructures, military, and healthcare services if they raised the income tax? They would likely become so much better. Yet, of course, there are downsides to it all. And finally, as we mentioned earlier, we will discuss the concept of debt, but we will not dive too deep into them. You see, Singapore's government debt has risen in the past few years. Indeed, they have one of the world's largest government debt to GDP, which should also raise the concern that it may have come from budget deficits. Well, actually, that's not quite the case. Understanding Singapore's government debt requires a different perspective than what might be applied to other countries. Firstly, it's crucial to note that Singapore's government debt is largely a product of its unique financial system. The government issues bonds, primarily in the form of Singapore Government Securities or SGS and Special Singapore Government Securities SSGS, which are mainly held by the Central Provident Fund CPF, the country's social security savings plan. This mechanism serves a dual purpose. It provides a safe investment vehicle for CPF funds while also helping to manage the country's liquidity. And moreover, the size of Singapore's government debt in relation to its GDP can be a bit misleading. A significant portion of this debt is not a reflection of fiscal deficits, but rather an accounting artifact. The funds raised through these bonds are not used for regular government expenditure, but are instead invested to earn returns. These returns are then used to meet the obligations of the CPF and contribute to the national reserves. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.